On April 2010, a volcano in Iceland erupted. The volcano's name is Eyjafjallajökull. If you'd like a challenge, try to pronounce it. Most newscasters at the time could not. For the first few hours after the eruption began, the world's attention was focused on the thick black cloud of smoke rising from the volcano. But as the hours passed, a new concern arose. The ash particles from the volcano were quickly spreading to the continent of Europe. Airline safety experts believed that the particles could clog jet engines and even bring down a plane. As a result, 24 countries grounded all flights and closed down their airports. In some countries, airports remained closed for more than a week. Thousands of flights were canceled. The airport closings had some intermediate effects. The most direct impact was on the tourists and business travelers who could not take trips or who were stranded and unable to return home. But the volcano also had indirect effects on prices for goods and services all the way around the world. For example, within days, the price of salmon in China and Japan skyrocketed, even though both countries were untouched by the ash from the volcano. And in the global market for jet fuel, the price dipped. Why did prices change in these markets? Before the volcano erupted, the supply and demand for jet fuel and salmon were in balance. After the volcano erupted, the balance changed in the market for jet fuel. The cancellation of flights caused a sharp drop in demand. This decrease in demand caused the price of jet fuel to fall. In the case of salmon, because most of the fresh salmon sold in Asia is caught in Norway and delivered by jet, the salmon could not be delivered. So there was a sharp drop in the supply of salmon, which caused the price to rise. When either supply or demand changes, the price and quantity adjust as well. This chapter considers how the forces of supply and demand interact to determine the price that a good sells for and how much of it is bought and sold. We can talk about a couple of other examples as well. Hurricane Katrina in 2005 caused major disruptions for seafood coming from the waters of the Gulf of Mexico. The availability of crabs, shrimp, and other seafood was reduced, but the demand for the seafood coming from the Gulf remained strong. Prices rose as other sources of seafood had to be found and substituted. The BP oil spill in 2010 caused a similar disruption with seafood, but the oil spreading to the beach communities also caused major problems in the tourism industry. Seafood was available, but demand was low, as buyers feared the effect of the oil on the food supply coming from the area. Tourism fell as a pristine beach could not be supplied because oil covered many beaches. Prices for seafood fell, but prices for beach rentals rose. And in March of 2011, the Japanese earthquake and resulting tsunami caused more than 10,000 deaths as whole towns were ravaged. The nuclear power plant disaster that unfolded in the days following the earthquake is still being resolved. Many cars, such as the Honda Insight, Toyota Yaris, and some Scion models, are made in Japan, so there was a supply problem as the automobile plants were shut down, especially those close to Sendai, the epicenter. Shipments of the Prius in the United States were cut off for many months. Supply problems also caused delays in American car factories owned by the Japanese. Prices for Japanese cars in the United States rose, and availability problems were also an issue. In the previous chapter, you learned that the market demand curve tells us how much of a good buyers want to buy at each price. In a previous chapter, you also learned about the market supply curve, which tells us the quantity firms will offer for sale at each price. But what determines the price that will actually be charged in the market? For example, why do the shorts at the mall cost around $30 rather than $5 or $90? To answer this question, we must think about both sides of the market, supply and demand, at the same time. So the key idea we're going to focus on in Module 16 is that the interaction of supply and demand, putting them together. We've studied the law of demand, we've studied the law of supply, now we put them together, and when we see that supply and demand interact with each other, it determines the price at which a good is sold in the market. And it also determines the quantity of the good that is exchanged between buyers and sellers. So first, I will demonstrate for you how supply and demand work together to determine the price and quantity of a good. Then I will explain why market equilibrium occurs when the quantity supplied equals the quantity demanded. And finally, you will be able to recognize how market forces cause the market price and quantity to adjust to equilibrium when we are out of equilibrium. So as we explore the crossroads of supply and demand, Our first step is to define the market we are talking about. We know that a market is a collection of people who could potentially buy or sell a good during a particular time period. A market could be as small as the people in one particular neighborhood, or it could be all the people in the global economy, depending on where buyers and sellers of the good in question are located. For our example, we'll use the entire U.S. market for cotton shorts, consisting of all buyers and sellers in the United States. We'll imagine that the offerings by each firm are the same and that the market is perfectly competitive. Our next step in determining the market price is to combine the supply and demand curves in the same graph as shown in this figure right here, this graph. Now, what we end up doing is we can combine the two curves because the separate supply and demand graphs each have price on the y-axis right here and quantity on the x-axis right here. And so, notice that the x-axis, which is labeled quantity of shorts in millions of pairs, represents either the quantity demanded or the quantity supplied, depending on which curve we are looking at. Now, the purpose of putting the two curves together is to find the point of what we call equilibrium in the market. At the market equilibrium, this right here would be point E on the graph, which is pointed out right there, point E. This is the quantity of shorts firms are willing to supply, but it also equals the quantity of shorts consumers are willing to buy. You can think of the equilibrium point as the point of rest in the market, resulting from a balance of forces. It's like a seesaw. You know, a seesaw is in equilibrium when two people of equal weight are on the opposite sides. In equilibrium, there is no tendency for either side of the seesaw to rise or to fall. So, in a similar way, a market has reached its equilibrium point when there is no tendency for the price or quantity to change, because the forces of supply and demand are in balance. On a supply and demand graph, like the one shown here, the equilibrium is represented by the point where the two curves intersect. Again, that occurs at the point labeled E for equilibrium. At this point, notice that the price is $30 per pair of shorts. The price that equates the quantity demanded to the quantity supplied is what we call the equilibrium price. Now, at point E, the quantity demanded and the quantity supplied are both equal to 5 million pairs of shorts. So the quantity supplied and demanded at the equilibrium price is called the equilibrium quantity. Because the quantity demanded equals the quantity supplied at point E, we know that every pair of shorts that firms want to sell will also have a willing buyer. With this balance, there is no tendency for the equilibrium price or quantity to change unless something causes the supply curve or the demand curve to shift. In the markets for most goods and services, powerful forces move the price and quantity toward their equilibrium values. We can explore these forces by asking what happens when the price is below or above the equilibrium price. This figure right here shows what would happen if the market started out at $20 per pair. That price is right here. Okay? Now, at $20 per pair, consumers would want to buy 7 million pairs of shorts, represented by point A, because that is, if we draw a horizontal line over to the demand curve, we intersect the demand curve at point A. And so that tells us that consumers would want to buy 7 million pairs of shorts. But how many shorts would suppliers be willing to supply? Well, again, if we draw a horizontal curve over to where we intersect the supply curve, that's at point B. And so firms would only supply 2 million pairs of shorts. Now, when the quantity demanded is greater than the quantity supplied, the difference between them is referred to as excess demand. Now, in this figure, the excess demand for shorts amounts to 5 million pairs. That's represented by the horizontal distance right here between points A and B. And so the distance between 2 and 7 is 5 million pairs. 7 minus 5 is 2. And so at a price of $20, we have too much demand. Now, when there is excess demand, the price will not remain there for long. Some consumers will be unable to purchase all the shorts they want to buy at the market price. Now, rather than going without, they would gladly pay more to get what they want. At the same time, firms will see shorts disappearing from store shelves, lines forming, and consumers willing to pay higher prices. In response, firms will raise the price of shorts above $20 per pair, and they will keep raising that price. But what happens next is even more interesting. As the price of shorts rises, the quantity of shorts demanded will decrease as the price goes higher. This follows the law of demand that you learned about in Chapter 4. The result is a leftward movement along the demand curve away from point A and towards point E. At the same time, the rising price causes the quantity supplied to increase. This follows the law of supply, which you learned about in Chapter 5. The increase in the quantity supplied is seen as a rightward movement along the supply curve from point B toward point E. These movements along the two curves shrink the gap between them. So as the price rises, the excess demand for shorts gets smaller and smaller. Now, when will the price stop rising? Only when it reaches the equilibrium price of $30 at point E. Until the price hits $30, the excess demand continues to exert upward pressure on the price. But at $30, with no gap between the supply and demand curves, there is no more excess demand to push the price higher. At point E, with the price at $30, the quantity demanded and the quantity supplied are both 5 million pairs of shorts. There are enough shorts for every consumer to buy as many as desired at the market price. So we say that clears the market of shorts. And when this happens, when there is excess demand, there is a word for it, and we call it a shortage. So you should be aware of that as well. Now, similar market forces are at work whenever the market price is above the equilibrium price. This figure illustrates the case of $40 for a pair of shorts. At this price, firms are willing to supply 8 million pairs of shorts, because that's where we intersect the supply curve if we draw a horizontal line. And that's shown by point G. But consumers only want 3 million pairs of shorts at this price, as shown by point F on the demand curve. Again, if we draw a horizontal line over, that's where we intersect the demand curve. Now, when the quantity supplied is larger than the quantity demanded, the difference between them is called excess supply, and we refer to that as a surplus. In this figure, the horizontal distance between the supply and the demand curves, represented by that yellow line right here, represents the excess supply of 5 million pairs of shorts, or the surplus of shorts. We have too many shorts available. An excess supply causes sellers to become frustrated, because they cannot sell all the 8 million pairs of shorts they are producing. And as firms compete with each other to find customers, they will offer shorts at lower and lower prices. So the market price of shorts, which started at $40 per pair, will fall. As the price falls, the quantity demanded, notice, rises. That's causing movement along the demand curve from point F to point E. And at the same time, the quantity supplied falls, resulting in movement along the supply curve from point G to point E. At the same time this happens, we are shrinking the distance between the two curves. These movements cause the excess supply of shorts to shrink like cotton in a hot dryer. Finally, when the price falls to $30, the excess supply is gone. The price stops falling. With the quantities of short supply and demanded now equal, producers can sell every pair that they produce at point E. So, you've just learned that whenever the market price is different from the equilibrium price, market forces move the price towards its equilibrium value. This chart right here shows how this happens. When the market price is higher than the equilibrium price, there is excess supply. And the market price, of course, will fall. But when the market price is lower than the equilibrium price, there is excess demand, and the market price will rise. In both cases, unless something like government price controls prevents the market price from fully adjusting, it will keep moving until it reaches the equilibrium price. Now that you understand how a market reaches equilibrium, you can see that both the supply curve and the demand curve influence the price of a good. The supply and demand curves work like the two blades of a pair of scissors. Just as both blades are necessary to cut through a piece of paper, both curves work together to determine the equilibrium price and quantity in a market. The interaction of supply and demand also explains why some prices are high and others are low. The relative scarcity of a good, meaning the size of demand relative to supply, is the key to price determination. When there is a lot of demand for something that is in short supply, like gold or the Super Bowl tickets you see here and Picasso paintings, the relative scarcity causes the good to be expensive even though no one really needs it to survive. No one needs Super Bowl tickets to survive, but here in Denver, when Super Bowl 48 occurred, there weren't nearly enough Super Bowl tickets to go around for everyone that wanted them, so people that bought them paid a lot of money for them. They became very expensive. The same idea explains why many goods that are very important to us, such as food and clothing, are available at much lower prices. For these goods, prices are low because the supply of them is very high relative to the demand for them.